Good morning.
Good morning.
So good to be with you. We have some really exciting topics before us this morning. But before I go into them, Jay asked me to say something about my work in Sweden and beyond. So I work for an organization called Apologia, Center for Christian Apologetics. And apologia, it's a Greek word. You will find it in the New Testament, actually 18 times, but not in our English or Swedish translations. It is a word that means to defend. It's originally a kind of legal term to give a defense in the courtroom. So in an ancient court, there was a categoria, that was the accusation, the prosecutor giving the argument for why you are guilty, and then you had the right to give an apologia, your defense. But it also has a broader meaning, not only giving a defense in the legal setting, but also the broader meaning of giving an answer, to explain things. And it's usually translated in the New Testament to defend or to answer. And so we have taken that Greek word as our name, apologia, from which we have apologetics. Apologia, Center for Christian Apologetics. And we identify that as a key need for the church in this time, to be able to explain the content of the faith, what we believe, and the truth of the faith, why we believe that content, instead of believing some other content that the culture around us affirm. And what we do in Apologia is that we are a small team. We travel to visit churches, Bible schools, theological seminars, conferences, to help God's people in this area. So we do apologetic training, showing the foundation apologetics have in the Bible, and then how we can apply that in the contemporary world, how we can deal with all the issues and criticism that the culture brings against us, and help to pave the way for the gospel in that sense. Some people think of apologetics as, it's those philosophy-minded guys, those nerds who into intellectual discussions, that small percentage of the population. Or people think of specific arguments for the existence of God, highly sophisticated logical arguments and so on. Apologetics is much, much broader. For me, it's very much an attitude where you are open for truth, open for reality, open to really deal with people and dialogue seriously with people about the big issues. And when we train people in apologetics, it's very much an issue of an attitude, of creating a culture in the church where all questions are welcomed, where doubt is not seen as a sin. Unbelief is a sin, but doubt, to have questions, to wonder how do things fit together. That's natural for us as human beings. We want to create an atmosphere where honest questions are given honest answers. We don't think there are answers to all questions, or that we can give exhaustive answers, but we think it's possible for Christians to give thoughtful answers to the important questions of life. And we think it should be built into the church culture, this apologetic mentality, in Sunday school, in youth work, in Sunday sermon. Sometimes a preacher, and you as pastors need, when you have read a text and you have explained it, you need to stop sometimes and say, why on earth do we believe this to be true? And not only proclaim it, but explain for people, why do we believe this to be true? In my church, if I sit at the last row, I never do that, but if I do, I have just 2 meters to the pavement outside, and all the secular Swedes are walking there. And I'm sitting in church and we read a text from the Gospel where Jesus raises someone from the dead. And in the church building, everyone takes that for natural. Yeah, he raised him from the dead. And I think that sitting there, people 2 meters behind me, if they heard this, they are nuts. Don't they know that once you have died, you continue to be dead? And it's really strange if no one in the church explains, why do we believe this to be a real event? How can you do that? Okay, so we try to help Christians with, and churches to cultivate that kind of mentality, attitude, that this is true. And then you're not afraid for questions. And then we do evangelism, especially student missions, from this perspective of a recent presentation of the gospel. So we do a part of missions weeks on universities, skeptics weeks. We do grill a Christian event, where non-Christians are just invited to ask questions to the Christian, to grill a Christian about their faith and what the gospel is. Okay, that is what we do in Apologia. We try to help people in the area of explaining the content and defending the truth of the gospel. Okay. This morning we have 2 really central subjects. One is central in our culture. The other is a central issue in our faith. So they are central issues in very different, in a different meaning. The first session will be about sex, the sexual revolution, and how to understand and respond to the sexual revolution in this media-dominated world. And then the second session will be about the center of our own faith, and that is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Okay. Lord, I pray that you will be with us, that you will guide our minds, our hearts, our thoughts. Help us to be faithful to your word. Help us to understand the world around us. And Lord, I pray that you will equip us so we better can reach out to this world of confusion and darkness and so much hurt, not least in this area of sexuality. Thank you for your goodwill. Thank you for your good plans for us as human beings. In your name we pray. Amen. So I will try to introduce a kind of apologetics for sex, how to understand and explain a Christian view of sex. I saw this picture. It was a sign outside the church. Please, no explanation inside the church. I'm sure it was directed towards tourist guides, that they should not go in and disturb people sitting and praying inside the church. But too often this is what's going on in the church. No explanations, not least in terms of what do we think about sex. Sometimes there is a proclamation of the biblical view of sex, but no explanation. And in too many churches today, it's just silence. Some things are assumed, but we do not talk about it. That is not the way forward today. We need to talk really honest about those issues, because the culture around us is not silent. They talk about the issues all the time. And if we are silent, the next generation within the church will have the view of the culture. That's totally automatic. If you don't address it, and the only thing people hear is what the world around us are saying about sex, the next generation will think along those lines. When we approach the issue of sex and start to talk about it, we need to really realize that all of us is coming with a backpack in this area. We all have a history. And people have histories that can be joyful in relationship to sex, but a lot of people have a history, a baggage, where there are pain and shame and hurt and confusion because of what other people have done to them or what they have done sexually. And therefore we need to talk about issues relating to sexuality, but we need to talk with sensitivity and compassion. You can be clear, but compassionate nonetheless. As soon as one moves into this area of ethics, we will face a problem. The problem of ideals and reality. That goes not only for sex, but for every ethical issue. You should not lie. Have you lied? A few of you nodded, and the rest of you lied. Yes. So, it's like that in all ethical areas. There is an ideal, and then there is a gap if you compare that ideal with your own life, with reality. So what do we do when we realize this gap? Well, there are two very common ways to handle that. What the liberal churches are doing is that they lower the ethical bar so it's adjusted to reality, or fallen reality, and you don't have a gap because your ethics suddenly just reflects your fallen human life. In more biblical churches, the temptation is to hide the gap. Everyone pretends that we live according to the ideal, and the important thing is not to be exposed, because then you will be kicked out. And so then we have a fellowship with hypocrisy and harshness, because people are pretending but are not honest. So we need to approach this issue of sex from a gospel perspective. The gospel solution to the gap between ideal and our human reality is first God's grace, forgiveness for our history, and secondly God's Spirit, sanctification, that through the power of the Holy Spirit our lives can be moved towards the ideal. So let's approach these issues from a gospel perspective of God's grace and God's Spirit, not lowering the ethical bar, but not going to hypocrisy and harshness. Okay. I like this quote. It talks about a modern man, and I think women can be included, but let's just read what Frank Sheed said in a book from the 1950s, but it's really true today. The typical modern man practically never thinks about sex. What? Okay? He dreams of it, of course, by day and by night. He craves for it, he pictures it, he's stimulated or depressed by it, drools over it. But this frothing, steaming activity is not thinking. Drooling is not thinking, picturing is not thinking, craving is not thinking, dreaming is not thinking. Thinking means bringing the power of the mind to bear. Thinking about sex means striving to see sex in its innermost reality and in the function it is meant to serve. Wow, that's good. Let's do some thinking about sex. That's the aim of this session. So first, let's look around. The sexual revolution. What is it? and what has it done to us? Most people who think of the sexual revolution actually think about my country, because the sexual revolution, in one sense culturally, started in Sweden in the late 50s and the beginning of the 60s. And here is an icon of that time, Anita Ekberg from Fellini's world-famous movie La Dolce Vita, the sex symbol of the 60s. But actually, the sexual revolution didn't start in my country, even though we unfortunately promoted it. The sexual revolution started, you have to go back to the 20s and 30s in Germany, and then you will meet this man, Wilhelm Reich, who said that tradition in this area, how we view sex, is, quote, the dead trying to suffocate the living. Tradition is destroying this area. We are suffocated by tradition. What we need is a sexual revolution. And the whole term comes from a book that he wrote. And he said, I already see a revolution in progress, and no power on earth will stop it. That is the sexual revolution. We will liberate sex from all the limitations that the church and Christianity had put upon sex. And Reich was, of course, an atheist, and he saw no transcendent, no meta-empirical authority of values. Nothing stands above us. We're totally free to create our own values. It kills sex if you put something above yourself and your own sexuality in terms of an ethical perspective. That is Wilhelm Reich's perspective. And he set up a program for the sexual revolution, like all revolutionaries do. They say, we are in a horrible situation, here's the way to go to be liberated, like Karl Marx did in terms of economics. And so his revolution is this. He wanted to see the abolition of lifelong monogamous marriage. He wanted to encourage infantile and adolescent sexuality. Sex is not only for grown-ups. It's part of our life from the beginning. Let's encourage children and adolescents to express their sexuality. Every idea of suppressing, holding back your sexuality is destructive. And to think of abstinence, it's pathological. It's destructive. The whole category of perversion, and the perverse is what is beside how it should be, beside what it is intended, should be eliminated, because there's no thinking behind sex. There's no God who has intended something with it. Therefore, there's nothing that can be unnatural. Nothing can be beside anything. So everything should just be accepted. And you can see that his revolution has been extremely successful. He's won in all areas except one. Our culture still draws a line in relationship to children. So we don't follow him there. But in all other areas, we follow Wilhelm Reich today in Western culture. And Wilhelm Reich, he was influenced by Sigmund Freud. And he has a very sophisticated term, polymorphous perversity. With that he meant, a child does not know any taboos. A child does not know that you should only have sex with humans, not with animals. A child does not know that you should not have sex with your close family. A child does not know that you shouldn't have sex with someone with the same sex as you. All that is added through socialization. That is not a natural thing, that's a cultural thing coming from Christianity, and we should get rid of it. But actually, if you want to understand the sexual revolution, you cannot just go back to Germany and Austria in the 1930s and 20s. You have to go back to the Enlightenment and Marquis de Sade, who is often called the founder of eroticism. And his thinking is the basis of the sexual revolution. It is from his last name we have the term sadism, to get sexual pleasure from inflicting pain on someone else, because that was one of the practices he did to a horrible degree. And he was philosophically very clear. He's written books which is a horrible blend of philosophical reasoning, there is no God, it means therefore there are no ethics, and pornography. So it's really clear, all this is because there is no God. The result of this is that the sexual revolution has put a wedge between sex and all the things that sex traditionally was connected to. Sex and marriage, sex and love, sex and permanence, sex and procreation, sex and the actual functions of the body. Traditionally, sex belonged into a context of those things. Now our culture has separated sex from all that context and made it into the highest value in itself, the sexual expression in itself. So this is what we have around us. How should we respond? There is no need, and it does not help us to be angry and shout. People will not listen. And I don't think our first step is to say, oh, all that is false and evil, even though I think it is. I think our first step needs for us to say, okay, this is how the culture views it today. We have another perspective. So the first step is not to dismiss all that is said in the sexual revolution, but say, okay, that is how the culture views it. We have another perspective. Later on, we can start to criticize. I'm trying to follow what I showed you Paul did in Athens. Later on, we can start to critique the perspective and argue for the truth of ours. But the first step is to present another perspective. And why we want to promote another perspective. And a key reason why we want to promote another perspective is that ideas have consequences, and that the consequences of the sexual revolution has been totally devastating. It has not delivered on its promise to liberate human beings sexually. On the contrary, it has created havoc in our culture. And if we would have time, we could go through so many areas, and I have all the statistics for Sweden. I think you should gather all the statistics for the US. What has this done to marriage and divorce? We are not able to keep long-term relationships any longer. It is so painful. In my little country, there are 37,000 abortions every year. In your country, it's, of course, the figures are much, much higher. Think of all the pain in those figures. For the baby, for the mother, for the father. You think of sexually transmitted disease. You think of all the pain and ugliness in infidelity. You think of prostitution. You think of sexual violence. You think of the lack of consent. You think of pornography, which is all over the place. You think of the mental health issue. Why are young people struggling with mental health issues today? There are many reasons for that, not only the sexual revolution, but I'm quite convinced that that's part of the picture. And we can go through the statistics here and look at a number of issues related to sex, direct or indirectly, and see that the sexual revolution is causing so much pain today. And that's not my Christian analysis. Think of the Me Too movement. Have we solved how we should deal with each other sexually in our culture? Obviously not. You know which country where the Me Too movement was the biggest? My country, where the sexual revolution has been furthered the most. There's a connection. Francis Fukuyama, well-known historian and sociologist, in his book The Great Disruption, he says this: one of the greatest frauds perpetrated during the Great Disruption, that is his term for the last 50 years, was the notion that the sexual revolution was gender neutral, benefiting women and men equally, and that it somehow had a kinship with the feminist revolution. In fact, the sexual revolution served the interest of men, and in the end put sharp limits on the gains that women might otherwise have expected from the liberation from traditional roles. The evaluation of the sexual revolution is out there, and it is a failure, the sexual revolution. Here is a young UK non-Christian feminist, written a really interesting book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, by Louise Perry. And she's totally agreed. The sexual revolution is a failure. Now notice, we are not claiming that before the sexual revolution we had a golden era where everything was right and good. Absolutely not. Actually, there was a need for a sexual revolution. If you study history and you read about all the brothels in Christian Europe, it's horrifying. So it was not a good situation before the sexual revolution. There was a lot of problems. But the sexual revolution has not solved those problems. It has made them worse in many areas. So we have another perspective, because we don't think the sexual revolution has delivered on its promise. And secondly, we have a second perspective because we are Christians. And we believe in a creator God, and therefore we have another view. I like this quote from Groucho Marx: I think sex is here to stay. He's right on the money. And that's one of the reasons we need to talk about sex, because it will not disappear. It's here with us, and therefore we need to have a good understanding. Theologian George Weigel is actually a Roman Catholic theologian, but there are some areas within the thinking about sex where we can learn some things from some of the Roman Catholic theologians, because they have done more thinking around this area than some of us evangelicals. He says this: for the Christian, the first moral question shifts from what am I forbidden to do to how do I live a life of sexual love that conforms to my dignity as a human person. That's really good. Of course, sooner or later you have to come and also ask the question, what is allowed and what is forbidden. But that is not the starting point. The starting point is, what am I as a person? And what does it mean to express myself sexually in a way that conforms to what God has created me to as a person in His image? So, if we look to the Bible has a very positive view on sex. It's the first thing God tells human beings: have sex. Well, or to quote God more correctly, be fruitful and multiply. But that involves sex. That's how God has invited us to be His co-creator. He has created us to male and female, and He has given us the possibility to be fruitful and to create new human beings, so to speak, and to walk along with the new human beings as their father and mother. In chapter 2, it says nothing about procreation, but talks about being joined together as one flesh, male and female. So there's the unity aspect. And then we have a whole book, the Song of Songs, which is celebrating the joy and wonder of the body, of the sensual aspect. So we're not afraid of sex as Christians, but we affirm it within the context that God has given to it. When Jesus is asked questions about divorce and remarriage, questions that relates to sex, he goes back to Genesis 1 and 2, and he says, have you not read that God, who created them from the beginning, and then he quotes Genesis 1, made them male and female, and said, and now he quotes Genesis 2, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Whatever God has joined together, let no man separate. Here Jesus quotes Genesis 1 and 2, and he gives us the context for sex. And you can, and that context is marriage. And marriage, as it is defined in the Bible, is this. If we take Genesis 2, where God speaks to Adam and Eve, it's obvious that he is giving them a definition of this new reality that there now is one man and one woman. And it's not words to them only. It's not a word specifically to them, because Adam cannot leave his father and his mother. So it's not a word specifically to those two. This is God's universal definition of what is the meaning of the fact that you now exists as male and female. And out from that we can define marriage like this. Marriage is a monogamous relationship. A man and his wife. So polygamy is besides God's intention. Secondly, it is a heterosexual relationship. Therefore, a man should leave his father and mother and cling to his wife. And we come back to this because this is, of course, a hot button issue today. But in the Bible, it's clear. It's a monogamous, heterosexual relationship. Thirdly, it's a relationship that is preceded by a change of social status. That is what's included in the phrase, leave your father and mother. Today, it's not a big thing to leave your father and mother. In my country, when you have gone through high school, you move into to a university city and live by your own there, or in a student corridor. It's no big thing. But in ancient times, you're supposed to honor your father and mother, and the phrase here, to leave, means that you establish a new social unit. So that is something public, that is something official. You establish a new social unit that is recognized by the other, because now you have left the unit you belonged to before, your father and your mother. Fourthly, ideally, this is a lifelong relationship with lifelong fidelity. You hold fast to, you're glued together, which is the meaning of the Hebrew word. And you are then, that new relationship is then completed in the sexual union. You become one flesh. Notice that marriage is not established by having sex. Some Christians teach that sometimes, that by having sex with someone you are married to them, so that marriage is created by the sexual union. That is not the view of the Bible. And I think practically we can realize that creates chaos. If I would take that seriously in Sweden and say Swedes are married to everyone they have had sex to, it's just impossible. In the Bible, when two people have sex without being married, it's not called a marriage. It's called sexual immorality. It's called porneia. The marriage is established by the covenantal promise. And that it's therefore in the marriage ceremony, the two are asked, do you take this? And they say yes, and yes. And then the person who is the officiant says, I hereby declare you man and wife. So marriage is created by the covenant, and then it's completed in the sexual union. Then you express with your bodies what you have just expressed with your mouth, but it is in that order. In the New Testament, we can read, marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept sure. So, in the view of the Bible, the context for sex is within marriage, and sexual relationships outside the marriage covenant is called sexual immorality. Now, this is extremely provocative for our culture, and non-Christians would say, what on earth is this? Of course you can have sex when you're married, but why can't you have sex outside marriage? What kind of view is that? Of course you have sex before you are married. My response to that would be twofold. The Christian view takes seriously what we all know about sex. What do I mean? I mean this. In our legal system, we make a difference between sexual acts and other bodily and physical acts. We don't see sex as equal to whatever else you do with another person. This is really interesting. Why is not rape identical to physical assault? Why do we have a special law condemning rape? Well, what's the difference if I punch you in the stomach or if I do something with your genitals? It's uninvited physical touch in both cases. Why do we separate them? Because everyone knows that the sexual act is a unique and much, much deeper thing. If I punch you, if someone is punched in the stomach, you don't have a trauma 2 decades later. But if you're raped, it makes something with you. And you can have a trauma for a long time. That's why everyone knows this is a unique act. Yeah, that's why we as Christians says it's a unique act. It belongs to a unique context. It's not that strange. If you start to think about what sex is, it's understandable that it is put within a certain specific context. And secondly, it has a unique function in all real love relationships. So, the culture tells us that it's no big deal to have sex, and people have sex from the teenage years and for the coming 10 years, and then they finally meet this person they really want to share their lives with. And then suddenly sex takes on a new function. Now, sex is viewed as the sign of unity between the two of us. Before, it was no sign at all. It was just fun and enjoyment and pleasure, but no sign that we belong together. The Christian view says, no, we want to be coherent. We want to view sex as a sign of belonging. So I think the Christian view is much, much more coherent, saying, when you meet the one you want to share your life with, then you have a sign for your unique commitment. Tom Cruise is the lead figure in the movie The Vanilla Sky, and he has a relationship with a beautiful woman, and then of course he enters into simultaneously a relationship with another beautiful woman. And when the first woman, Julie, realizes that David has another woman, she says this to him: don't you know that when you sleep with someone, your body makes a promise whether you do or not? That's profound for being in a Tom Cruise movie. So, I think most people looking at this, seeing this movie, they would nod and say, yeah, that's true. And then when I present the Christian view of marriage, say, oh, how can you say, well, start to think. It really makes sense to view sex as something within the marriage context. When I was a teenager, this woman was famous even in Sweden, Erika Jong. She was one of the world-famous feminists and one of the proponents of the sexual revolution. I'm sorry to use some words that I usually don't use, but I'm just quoting here from an article, so I hope you can bear with me. Her book, Fear of Flying, was an international bestseller, and 30 years after that book was published, she was interviewed in Swedish newspapers. And Fear of Flying was an argument for the sexual revolution. And the Swedish newspaper, 30 years later, said this: Erika Jong invented the expression "the simplest fuck," sex without obligations, through her novel character Isadora Wing in The Fear of Flying from 1973. She lives in a free marriage and starts a relationship with a man who she has fantastic sex with. And now the journalist asked Erika Jong, the simplest fact, what do you say about it 37 years later? It does not exist in reality. It's just a fantasy. Sex always causes some kind of relationship. Okay. Let's go on. We are not challenged only with the traditional view of marriage, that sex belongs to marriage. We are even more challenged in defining marriage as a monogamous, a heterosexual relationship. So we are now faced with the LGBTQIA+, because they are adding syllabus question. What can we say about that? The LGBTQ ideology has been built around a number of cliches that we need to learn to deconstruct. People say it's a question about human dignity and human rights. And of course, I fully affirm everyone's human dignity and human worth. That whole idea comes from our faith, that everyone is created in the image of God. But a human with dignity, a human with rights, can still live in a wrong way sexually. You need to distinguish between your anthropology, that you view everyone as valuable, from the issue of your sex ethic. So I'm not taking away the dignity of any person, but I have a specific view on what is a good sexual ethic. People said it's genetically caused and unchangeable. A twofold problem with that. Ethics, it's not solved by genetics. Regardless of your genetics, we can still discuss what is right. If aggression is genetically based, it does not give you a free pass to hit people. So those two questions are not related. Your genetics and what is ethical right. And secondly, it is not genetically caused. They have done huge international identical twin studies, and it's been shown it's not genetically caused. No one knows the developmental story behind our sexual identities and interests and so on. It's clouded in a mystery, but you cannot say it's genetically caused. There can be a genetic component, that's another thing, but it's not caused genetically. They say it's found in nature and therefore natural. When did the animals become ethical role models. It's not a good argument. Animals eat each other. So, ethical issues relate only to human beings. You cannot look for nature and say what is there is natural for humans. That's two separate issues. People say love can never be wrong. And I totally agree. Finally, an argument I agree with. Love can never be wrong. But we shouldn't confuse love with sex. I'm called to love my parents, not have sex with them. Love my friends, not have sex with them. Love my kids, not have sex with them. I need to think really careful. In what relationships should love be expressed sexually? You cannot go from love to therefore it's sexually right. Or I've heard Christians say, I prayed about it and have peace. I'm glad you prayed about it, but our inner state of mind is not the final arbiter for ethical positions. That goes for if you are not a Christian, you need to use your mind, not only your inner feeling. And if you're a Christian, you need to relate your state of mind to what the Word of God says. So I'm not impressed by the arguments that have shifted the whole view on LGBTQ. And I notice also it's an absolute incoherent argumentation in the movement in terms of how they look at human being and our identity. For the lesbian and gays, the argument is often, this is a fixed identity caused by genes and biology. It cannot be changed, therefore it should be allowed to be lived out. Bisexuality, on the other hand, is presented as a flexible identity which can move between the different pools. It's not fixed. Trans is a fixed identity of the inner person that is independent of and in conflict with the body. For lesbians and gays, it's a fixed bodily identity to a large degree. So here it's very different. And Q, the queer, says there is no fixed identity at all. Everything is constructed and can therefore be deconstructed. There is no intrinsic identity at all. So you see, this is totally incoherent in terms, how do we view human identity? Do we have a fixed identity, or is it not fixed? Is it the inner identity, which is fixed, or is it something related to our body, our genes, that is fixed? Leaving those sides, question or issues aside, whoever wanted to discuss issues of sexuality needs to draw a line somewhere. No one accepts everything that is possible sexually, or at least nearly no one. I'm sure you can find some idiots who would accept absolutely everything. But even in the most promiscuous secular West, people would draw a line against pedophilia, for example. So everyone needs to think through what's the criteria for draw this line between what is a good and not good sexuality or sexual expression. How can I draw the line? Listening to the culture, most of the Western culture would say either of these three things. Follow your heart, as long as it's in accordance with your own heart. Follow your heart. Do not go against your own inner being. Some people then realize, okay, that's not really enough. You need to add something. So they say, follow your heart as long as you do not hurt anyone. You're not allowed to physically hurt anyone. And then people say, oh, yeah, that's true, but I'm not sure that is really enough. You need to make sure not only that you do not hurt anyone physically, sex should be between consenting adults. So you're really sure that the other person is okay, and it shouldn't be a child. So most Swedes would say, well, here you have the criteria. There are no other criteria than this. I totally agree with those 3 criteria, by the way. I'm not objecting towards them. I think we should listen to our heart. But not only, but of course we should listen to our heart. It's the first step. We should not hurt anyone. Sex, of course, should be between consenting adults. But I don't think this is enough. I think there needs to be adding criteria. What is missing here? 2 very obvious things. We have criteria that do not connect sex with love. That's very strange. Every mature human being, when they finally have met someone they want to share their lives with, will connect sex with love. It's a very shallow view if you cannot say anything about the relationship between sex and love. And secondly, there's no connection to the body. Sex has to do with the body, and we have criteria that just ignores the body. So my problem here with the criteria is that we are not true to the reality of what sex is. And let me give you 2 examples of why I don't think the criteria are enough. In areas of sexuality, human beings after the fall are really strange. And we can find whatever in terms of what people are sexually interested in. There is a sexual identity called dendrophilia. It refers to a paraphilia in which people are sexually attracted to or sexually aroused by trees. I recently read an interview with a young Swedish woman. Her sexuality was directed towards trees. So she went out in the woods. She brought home pieces of tree. She followed her heart. No one was harmed. The tree couldn't consent, but... And I would say, isn't this sad? Wouldn't it be better if she could relate sexually to a human being in a loving relationship instead of relating to a thing? Her own body is sexually there for something different than for a tree. She's a woman. She can carry a baby. She can be a mother. But that can never happen with a tree. The fullness of what sex and our bodies are is not fulfilled in that relationship to a thing. Or, oh yeah, sorry. There we have that. If we think of the tragic situation in Russia and Ukraine now, in a few years' time, there will be missing tens of thousands of men. And there will be so many women who will have a hard time finding a man, having a hard time becoming mothers. That's a tragic fact of a war. So, why shouldn't we accept polygamy? That could easily solve the longing for many women to have a context of love, to be able to be mothers. And our culture will not be able to answer that question. Why not open up for polygamy? A number of people will individually say, I will be much happier in that state than if I'm not allowed to join into that relationship. So our culture has no tools of navigating in terms of sexuality any longer. Oh, I see, my time is gone. I want to say one more thing. a lot of people in our culture, they would say, you cannot make a difference between heterosexuality and homosexuality. It's like you use your right hand or your left hand. It's like you have blue eyes or brown eyes, or you have certain color of your hair. It's just a variation, and it's just a constructive diversity. It's just interesting that we are not the same. And the fact that a minority is using left hand and the majority is using right hand does not make it right to say you should use your right hand, stop using your left hand. So what our culture is saying is hetero and homo is equal, it's on the same level. And I would say persons are on the same level. They're created in the image of God. But hetero and homo as sexualities are not on the same level. That is to lie about reality. Physically, it is a man's body and a woman's body that fit together. Our genitals is made that way. So a man and a woman can be united in a way that is natural for the body. In a way, two women's and two men's bodies cannot be united in what it is for, what is natural for the body. Biologically, if you ask evolutionary biologists, they would say that the point of sexuality is reproduction, if I'm speaking as a biologist. Now it's only the hetero relationship who can be fertile. Only in male-female relation can new life be conceived. And now when they say that those two men are having a child, they have of course borrowed from the hetero side. There is a woman and an egg involved somewhere. And psychologically, there is a lack of complementarity between male and female in the same-sex relationship. That complementarity that we value so much in other circumstances, that men and women are different, and there's something interesting happening when we are coming together. So, hetero and homo is not identical. People are on the same level of worth and dignity, but hetero and homo is not the same. Lastly, sorry, I'm going a little bit over, but if I give a presentation on the university, on whatever subject, science and faith, existence of God, why is the Gospels reliable, the problem of evil, uniqueness of Christ in world religions, what do you think will be the question in the Q&A? What do you think about homosexuality? Okay, I just spoken 45 minutes on science and faith. Let's keep the questions on that issue. You and I can talk about it afterwards, but for now, let's focus. Sometimes I can come away with that and we have a dialogue afterwards. Sometimes the audience will not allow me to come around the question. So, what do I then say? And this, I think we need to be prepared, all of us, to give an answer. What's your view on homosexuality? I would then say this. Okay, what we believe as Christians is no secret, so I'm happy to tell you what I think, but I cannot give you a yes or no answer. So if you want to know what I think, you need to follow me for a few minutes, because I need to give you my reasoning. So are you willing to listen for a few minutes? I will answer your question. Okay? So we have an agreement. My view is this. I view every person as a person with dignity and value. Human worth, that whole idea comes from my faith, that we are all created in the image of God. So Christianity is the most inclusive of all philosophies and religions, because it says every one of us are created in the image of God, are loved by God, are called by God to be His children. Regardless of who you are, what you have done sexually, what other people have done to you sexually, whatever your history, you are created in the image of God, and you are welcome through the gospel to become a child of God. And if you heard anything else from Christians, I'm really sorry. Secondly, the Christian faith is really inclusive, saying that every one of us is broken and fallen. Christianity places me at the bottom. It means I cannot look down on anyone, because there's no one below. We are in the same boat. The technical term is we are sinners. We've lost the glory of God, and that goes for all of us. Christianity is the most inclusive religion in that it says everyone has fallen short of the glory. We are sinners, when we basically have the same need. Individually, our struggles differs, but we are on the same level here too. We are on the bottom. Thirdly, as a Christian, I'm a proponent of a free society. You're free to live how you want to live, and I can live how I want to live. You can believe what you want to believe, I can believe what I want to believe. Of course, we need to have some limits. We're not allowed to hurt someone, and so on. I'm sure we can agree on some limits. But generally, I'm not trying to impose on you my way of living, and I hope you don't impose your way on me. And then I hope we can find some good time to discuss. What do you think? And I can present what I think, and we can give arguments for different positions. But I'm for a free society. You realize what I'm doing right now? I've not said anything about the Christian view on homosexuality. I imagine in my mind that my audience, they are sitting with a number of balloons, and each balloon is filled with prejudice, misconceptions, anger against Christians. And before I can say anything about the Christian view on homosexuality, I need to pick a hole in each of those balloons of prejudices, so the emotional energy goes out. Because before that, I will not listen to what I have to say. Okay, so I picked a hole in at least 3 of the balloons. Fourthly, you have understood that I believe in God. If there's no God, the natural question is, what do I want? I totally get that, and that is what our society tells us to ask. What do I want? For me, that's also an important question. I want to listen to my heart. What do I want? But since I believe there is a God, and this you can understand logically, if there is a God, there is a question above, what do I want? And that question is, what do God want? That follows logically if there is a God who has created us. And I'm convinced of that, and therefore I do like to follow God's will. And since I think He is a good God, I'm not afraid of His will for my life. Now, if you listen to Christians historically have been totally united on this issue, but today Christians are divided, and you will find 2 different Christians' answers on homosexuality. Note here, I do not affirm that there are given 2 different answers, but it's just a sociological fact, and I use that to ease the feelings of my audience. Okay, so there are Christians are giving different answers today. That is because we have different views on 2 issues. We have different views of the priority between body versus our inner being. Our bodies actually gives heterosexual signals that only the male-female relationship is fertile. Male and female body fits together in another way than 2 men or 2 women. But then people can, in their inner being, be attracted to the same sex. So what should we give priority to? The traditional Christian view is to say you should go with the signals of your body. The new answer is follow your inner identity. And the other reason we don't have the same view is that we interpret some important biblical passages differently. Now you can Google my name and you will immediately see that I argue for the traditional view that you should go follow the signals of your body. And I think that the Bible is quite clear in its view on sexuality, that God's intention is a male-female relationship within a marriage context. And finally, you cannot understand my view if you don't see that we live with a different hierarchy of values. All cultures have a hierarchy of values, and then you have 2, 3 values at the top, which everyone thinks, I need to have that in order to live a fulfilled life. And then below that, there's a number of things you can have or not have. It's not that important, but these things. In our culture, we have moved up sexual expression to the top level. And people are afraid that I cannot live the fulfilled human life if I'm not expressing myself sexually. For us as Christians, sex is important, but it's not on that top level. It's further down in the hierarchy. And you cannot understand this if you don't understand that we follow a celibate man. We think that Jesus Christ lived the most beautiful lives ever, and he never expressed himself sexually. He was a man, he had a body, he was a sexual being, but he never entered into a sexual relationship because he had another calling for his life. When I've said this, sometimes this happens. I hear what you're saying, I'm a lesbian. What's in it for me? Good question. So if you're interviewed by a journalist on your church view on sexuality and homosexuality, and you present your case, you need to be prepared for this follow-up. Okay, so what's in it for me as a lesbian? My answer would be exactly the same that is in it for me as a heterosexual male. There's no difference. What's in it is forgiveness for sin, being born again, being given a hope of eternal life with Jesus, being able to live right now as a child of God in daily communion with God, starting to explore a life in according with his will for me as a created being. That is what's in it for you, and what's in it for me. It's the same thing. And ultimately it comes down to the question, is Jesus able to deliver on his promise? He says he's the bread of life. If you come to him, you will never hunger. He is the living water. If you come to him and drink that water, you will not be thirsty. He is the light of the world. You follow him, you will not wander in darkness. He can give you something that actually transcends your own sexuality in worth if he is true. So that is what's in it for you and what's in it for me. Okay. Sorry, I've gone over time, and still we have, there are so many questions we have not addressed.
Don't worry, we do it all the time.
Okay. So I hope this has been helpful. If you go into our Focal Online website, I will talk more about European Leadership Forum next, but you can find a lot of material on sexuality, Christian view on sexuality. I have a number of presentations where I address also other questions, but I think this is an issue where we need to talk much more to each other about what is the Christian view, how can we relate it to our culture, how can we help the young generation to understand and affirm the Christian view.